Did you know that J.K. Rowling was not only a remarkable writer, but she was not a remarkable student as many of you think? She didn't devote much effort to classes and preferred reading Tolkien and Dickens. Even though she was not a good student, some of her professors say that she was a competent student and not a poor student. What happened is that after her college education, she became a teacher, started a family, became a mother, and then during her financial struggles, she started writing a novel. And that novel turned out to be Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. After the publication of the first novel, she started gaining popularity in all the places, particularly in English-speaking countries, and now she remains a billionaire. Even though she started her career with financial struggles, now she has so much money that she can count. She still works every day, which proves her work ethic. The underlying message about this interesting fact is that success will always find you no matter what. What you have to do is you have to keep on working towards that success. Now, on with the show. Preview. And today's guest is none other than Francois. He is here to talk about his latest book, Word Realm. Word Realm is a young adult fantasy novel in which the world is filled with magic and is governed by sorcery. Welcome to Writer's Preview, Francois.
Hi, Karthik. Thank you very much for having me on the show. And hello to everybody who is tuned in and who's listening. It's great to be here.
Thank you for being here. And how are you doing today, Franz?
I'm doing great, thank you. And yourself?
I'm fine here as well. In India, we are handling the pandemic our own way and trying to get vaccinations to everyone who got infected. Since you are staying in Indonesia, how is Indonesia dealing with the pandemic, Franz?
Well, here we're in Bali, and the numbers are quite high. There's quite a large number of new infections still, but pretty much I think everybody just is doing their bit, and they're wearing masks whenever they go out, and they're all very mindful in terms of the procedures that have been communicated to them, what they need to do to try and prevent the spread and to prevent getting it. So I think everybody's mindful of that. There is a lot of quite a few comments though about foreigners in the country who don't follow the protocol. So that's a bit of a problem and a bit of a concern. And there's a couple of people that have been deported as well recently, I think partially related to that. But on the whole, they're doing whatever they can to try and contain it.
Yeah, that is right, Franz. We are all doing everything we can to overcome this pandemic. My first question to you is, inspiration can come in a lot of ways. And since your novel is a young adult fantasy novel and it deals with magic and sorcery, what I wanted to ask you is, what inspired you to write a novel like Word Realm, Franz?
Okay, well, this was basically a novel that I've wanted to write all my life. So I got into fantasy books sort of at about a teenage time in my life, and I started reading books. And I discovered, firstly, some people may have heard of Raymond Feist. He wrote a novel called Magician, which to me is one of the best fantasy novels I've ever written. And then there was Frank Herbert's Dune, which is not really that much fantasy, it's probably more science fiction. But reading those kind of books sort of inspired me to sort of get my own ideas of the fantasy world or fantasy worlds that could be created, and to start asking myself, well, just imagine what it would be like if we could actually go into a fantasy world of our own. And, if we could cross into that, what would it be like? And that's pretty much where the idea for the book was born. And then from there, it just always stuck with me since I was a teenager, and I always had the idea that this was a book that I wanted to write. So I finally sat down at some point and put pen to paper.
Wonderful answer, Franz. During your answer, you mentioned Dune. Are you a fan of the novel, Franz?
I am indeed. I read the whole series. I thought it was excellent. I haven't read a lot. How many novels
does it consist of, Franz, the whole series?
It was a long time ago that I read it as a teenager. I haven't reread it, but I think there was at least about seven, 8 or 9 books, I think, that I read.
Why I'm asking you is because I saw a movie that came in the 80s that was actually a movie adaptation of the novel, and it was only one movie. I was just wondering how they were able to put everything inside a 1.5 hour movie when it actually had a story of about 7 or 8 novels, as you just said. Did you see any movie adaptation of Dune, Franz, that did justice to the actual series?
No, I've never seen the movie adaptation. But if it was one movie, I think perhaps it didn't cover the whole series.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. You were saying that you started reading fantasy novels which inspired you to write Word Realm. What I wanted to ask is, can you, since you started reading when you were a teenager, many of the fantasy novels, as a genre, fantasy has been popular for many years since its inception. And right now it is even more popular because of authors like Tolkien, George R.R. Martin, and J.K. Rowling. According to you, what separates you as an author who's just getting into this science fiction, fantasy genre from others? What is the unique selling point of Francois Kaiser, according to you?
I think the unique selling point, I think, with any fantasy novel is pretty much the story that the author has in mind. And I think what makes fantasy so attractive is that every single story is potentially different. Sure, a lot of fantasy novels have similar parts to them, such as there has to be a journey or a quest, or there's something that has to be obtained, or it's a battle between good and evil. But it's all how the author puts that across in whatever the story is that they create. And I think the main thing that sets each one of those books apart is basically the world that the author creates. Now, here in Word Realm, I think for me it was more what would be more unique is the story itself. But I think if you look, because this is really my first attempt at writing a fantasy novel, if you look at the word building, there's probably a lot more that could be done. And since then, I've actually learned a lot in terms of from that perspective. When I just think of, when you spoke a little bit or mentioned Harry Potter, and I just think in terms of that, how the whole series must have been planned in advance, and for the whole world to have been built out before you could actually start writing the series. So I think from that perspective, for me, it's really the story at this point with this novel, and what readers will take away from the story, as opposed to looking at the entire world that's been built, because the world as such, which is described in my book, is not that large. It's confined to sort of a specific smallish area within a kingdom. So that's where a key differential would lie. And so readers would have to look more at the story itself as opposed to the world.
So according to you, story is the king, and that's what grips the readers into continue reading the novel. Right, Franz?
I think primarily, although the world that gets built around it would have a very big impact at the end of the day. So moving forward, in terms of other fantasy stories I may write, there would be a lot more focus and attention on the world building as well.
Sure, Franz. And since you already said this is your first attempt at writing a fantasy novel, it must have been quite a journey from start to finish, from your planning stages and until you finished writing the manuscript. Can you tell us a little bit about the entire experience of coming up with the story and the characters, and then putting your thoughts into the paper, Franz?
Okay. Yeah, I think in my journey in terms of this was, as I said, I had the idea since I was a teenager to write the story. And when I finally got to the point to say, okay, well, now I'm actually going to sit down and I'm going to write the story. This was actually my very first novel that I had written as well. So there's still a lot that I had to learn as an author, just in the general writing process. So when I sat down to write this story, I had ideas in my head. And pretty much I just sat down and I wrote what I wrote from my head, and I just put it all down onto paper. So I still found that a lot of it was coming to me as I was writing. So I didn't have all the characters, but it sort of came where I say, okay, wait a minute, in terms of this, there needs to be a character which can fulfill a specific role, and another character would drop into the novel. So at the end of the day, I think the editing process, going back before it was published, was needed a lot more work in terms of making sure that there were less plot holes, in terms of making sure that the characters tied up, and those sort of things. So for me, it was there was also a lot of stopping and starting, because being my first novel and having read the likes of Raymond Feist and Stephen Donaldson, and there's this constant thing of comparing yourself to them and saying, well, wow, could I actually achieve or write something as good as what they have written? Could I be as successful as they could have been? So there's a lot of self-questioning that goes on, and it's like starting and stopping and say, should I do this? Is anybody going to bother reading it, or am I wasting my time? So there was a lot of that went on. There was a lot of editing as I was writing, so it was taking a lot longer to actually write, because I would write maybe 2 or 3 chapters and I'd go back and I'd want to edit them, until I finally got to a point where I said, if I carry on like this, I'm just never going to finish this book. And then from there, the writing started to flow better, where I would just write, and then at the end, okay, I'm going to go back at the end of the day and then just edit the whole project. So it wasn't the easiest of processes for me, but there was a lot of learning that I took away from it as a writer in terms of the process. And it certainly stood me in good stead for all the writing that I've done since then. But it wasn't an easy journey, and it's like I said, you constantly ask yourself, well, who am I to think that I could maybe write something as good? But I think there's a place for every story. Every story has a market for its readers. So there's some fantasy novels which I, for example, don't connect with, and then there's others which I do connect with. For example, everybody used to say to me, have you read Harry Potter? Have you read Harry Potter? And I didn't read Harry Potter until last year. It's about November, December, I finally sat down and I said, you know what, I'm going to do this. And our daughter was interested to read Harry Potter, so we sat and we'd read it together. And we did all the books from start to finish within, just before New Year, we were finished. And now, I must say, we thoroughly enjoyed the books, and that in itself, again, was a learning experience for me to read those kind of stories and take in what I could take away from there and learn. So, yeah.
Must have been a difficult journey completing the book and publishing it. And you also said that the writing part and the editing part both took equal time in the process of completing the story. You talked about having doubts. During those moments of self-doubt, what gave you confidence to keep going, to keep writing so that you can complete the story, Franz?
I'd say what gave me the confidence is that I believed number one, I think it's what a lot of writers go through, and I think we just need to understand that whatever we write, and even Ernest Hemingway said it, he said the first draft of anything, he didn't say it in such nice words, but he said the first draft of anything is rubbish. So coming to the understanding that, okay, well, whatever it is, I'm going to write this because I can always go back and then I can make it better. I can look at it and see where I can, where things need to be fixed, where I can change things, where I can improve things. So there was that kept me going. Plus also the fact that this was my dream. And if there's one thing that's always stuck with me throughout my life, it's been that I have wanted to be a writer. There's many things that I have considered doing in the past in my life, and I've tried some of them, and I got to a point where I said, okay, no, this is not what I want to do. But writing it's that one thing that has stuck with me right through all my life. And I remember when I was at school, because I didn't do that much writing, I would write on and off during school. But come exam time, I don't know why, but my passion to write at that point would burn strongest. And I would sit there and I'd think, well, now I really want to write, but I have to study, otherwise I'm not going to pass my exam. So, but it was this conflict. And when I look back, I say, that's the one thing, if you are looking to try and identify what your passion is, look at what it is that you would rather be doing when you were doing something you don't want to be doing. And that'll probably give you a good point you in the right direction as to what your passion is. And that's what I always had. And knowing that is part of also what kept me going. But also the burning desire to tell a story. So it's really a number of those factors all coming together.
Yes, Franz, your passion for storytelling really shines through when I read your novel. And I have to congratulate you on achieving your dreams. You have become a published author now. You have written many novels, and right now, Word Realm, is it coming out or is it already out, Franz?
It's already been published. So it's available on most of the online retail outlets. So it's not on Amazon at the moment, though. But it is on Barnes & Noble, it's on Kobo, and a host of other platforms where it can be found. So, and it's really, the ebook is available for $2.99. I have just recently started the process to publish it in paperback as well. So it should be ready and available in paperback soon, hopefully.
I urge our audience to go and purchase the book if you are interested in reading a good fantasy novel. The story and characters are wonderful, and if possible, we will put the purchase links down in the description box below. Those who are interested can go to the description box and click on the link to buy Word Realm. My next question to you is, different writers have different methods while composing a story. Some plan everything out and strictly adhere to their plans. Did you come up with the story and characters at first and then went ahead writing the story, or did you tackle world building first, Franz?
I think in the case of Word Realm, as I said, being my first novel, I didn't really plan anything else. Like I said, I had the idea in my mind. I had some of the characters there in my mind, and I just got to a point where I said, okay, now I had an idea of where I wanted the story to start and where I wanted the story to finish. And for me, it was a case of putting that down on paper and filling in the gap in between. And that's basically what I did. And in terms of world building, the world building sort of happened as I was writing as well. But since then, I've come to, some people still will just write without planning, but I think the planning is imperative. And like I mentioned Harry Potter. When you think of Game of Thrones, I just think that when we talk about the planning process, I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think George R.R. Martin, I think J.K. Rowling actually sat down and they did all the planning beforehand, because I certainly can't see that, for example, J.K. Rowling wrote the first novel and then said, oh, okay, I think I'm going to write a second novel and a third novel. So I think she had planned the whole series out, and she knew it was going to be 7 books, to my mind anyway. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think anybody who really wants to write and write successfully, they have to plan the story. They have to plan the characters. They have to plan every single thing about that story, how the characters interact, the setting, where it needs to start, where it needs to finish, and basically, I've seen some very good books with subplots along the way. So it's not just the one plot of the story start to finish, but there are subplots which arise during the story. And I think that's all part of planning the story and what makes it really, really successful. And I think it's really imperative that the planning process can't be ignored. I think it's integral to the writing process. And I know as authors just want to sit down, they want to write. Authors also don't want to market their books. Their passion burns so strongly that they want to write. They're not marketers. They're maybe not planners, but it's something which they have to do. They have to pull the reins in and say, okay, this is something I've got to do. And they have to write to plan once they've done it. So, yeah.
Writing is spontaneous, and you're right in saying that writers are spontaneous indeed. They would just want to sit and write, and they don't want to mimic an architect. Right? Like they want to build a building, they have to go back to the drawing room and come up with the blueprint of the building. I mean, it is like that. Some writers do the way of people like George R. R. Martin and J.K. Rowling, and most of them are like you, Franz. They just go with the flow and see what comes. You told me that the ideas for the novel came during your teenage years. Were you able to recollect all those ideas, concepts, and characters from those early years when you sat down a few years ago to write the novel, Franz?
I was able to recall the characters. Yeah, I think if anything, it grew over time. So from when I had the initial concept in my mind as a teenager, I think from there it just grew and grew, and more got added to it and more got added to it over the years. So I was able to record everything.
Good to know, Franz. My next question is, while I was going through the novel, I found a lot of nature imagery in the novel. One thing that struck me the most was when Rian, the name of the character in the novel, she sits by the Rainbow Lake and she watches the birds while walking under the trees. The trees, of course, were near the Rainbow Lake, and she says that she can sit there for days without moving and just look at the birds as well as the lake. She seems like a romantic. What I want to ask is, are you a romantic by nature, Franz?
I like to think of myself as one, yes. Yes. I think Word Realm has perhaps hints of romance in it, but it's not a fantasy romance per se. Although I think the fantasy genre does well to sort of tie that in. So future projects I see would potentially have that. I've also tried my hand at romance writing. So I've done quite a bit of ghostwriting as well, and a lot of that was romance writing. And I think from that perspective, again, you sort of have to find what works for you. And I did so much writing in that respect that I came to the point where the strange thing is I used to read books in the first person, written in the first person. And when I read books that were written in the first person, for example, a crime novel or a mystery novel, I found that I didn't particularly enjoy them. And yet when I take romance novels and I see they're written from the first person point of view, it seems to be a whole different ballgame. And they seem to work a lot better when you have the first person point of view, which is then, how do you say, juxtaposed between the male and the female character, or the two main characters. And I find it works very well. And I found that when I tried writing like that from a romance perspective, it actually works quite well as well. So I find it very easy to write like that. So from a romance perspective, I think it's good to write like that. But from a fantasy novel, I think perhaps not. At least that's just my opinion. But yeah, I think I am a romantic. I like to think I am. And I like to try and put that into a story wherever possible.
Sure, Franz. I came across the word God many times in the novel, and particularly in its plural form. So the word gods relate to a religion that is polytheistic. If I may ask, can you tell us a little bit about the religion followed in Word Realm?
Okay. The religion, just broadly, the religion in Word Realm is more, it's going back to sort of thinking of the ancient times when we know, for example, the Greeks had many gods. So it's thinking that...
Is it more on the line of paganism then?
I would say so, yeah. Yeah.
Did you draw inspiration from Greek and Roman mythology, particularly when it came to coming up with the religion for Word Realm, France?
I think it's a factor because I've always been quite interested in that era. So it's always something which particularly I think of in terms of fantasy as well. So and there's another story which sort of I had in mind which went back to the time of Pompeii, again, which I envisioned sort of had, where they had multiple gods. So I think it's something which will probably always come through in any fantasy story that I write.
Sure, Franz. And my next question is about the character Rian, which we discussed earlier, where she sat near the lake. Here I want to ask about Rian's secret. Her secret is that she keeps the knowledge of the fantasy world to herself and to her husband and doesn't reveal it to others, even to her daughter. And the reason for that is that she states that it might get polluted by others if others come to know about this fantasy world. I would like to read a few of the lines from the novel. I quote, "If a place like this existed on Earth, it would be overrun by people, many of whom would have no respect for it and pollute it in some way or another." Am I right in assuming that you are an environmentalist, Franz? Because these words tell me so.
Yes.
So
yes.
As a fellow environmentalist, what can we do to save our environment despite burning it to the ground, so to say?
Kartik, I think there's many things. I mean, certainly, look, I'm not the expert on this, but I have many ideas and I stand to be corrected where I may make something or say something which is perhaps wrong. But to my mind, my opinion is I think there's a lot that can be done. And I think for us as individuals, when we look at ourselves as individuals or just our family, quite often we think, well, yeah, maybe we can do something better. They talk about separating garbage into the right recycling bins, and we try to do that. But I think a lot of us have sort of this little thought at the back of our mind saying, what sort of impact do I really, as just myself or my family, have on the global picture? And I think it's this that possibly affects a lot of people or makes them think, well, why should I bother? But if you reverse that thinking and you say, well, if a lot of individuals or families actually do something positive, collectively, they will have a great impact. And I think it's that we need to keep in mind for one thing. Another thing I read the other day is still the extent of deforestation across the world, in Amazon and in terms of other rainforests. And this is where I say maybe I'm speaking under correction, but I do believe that, if I look at how the world has reacted to the pandemic, the world said, well, it's here and it's now, and we better do something quickly. Perhaps not as quickly as we would have liked, but something has been done and is still being done. And I think it's because we recognize that it is right here and it's right now. We talk about climate change and we say, yes, we've still got a couple of years, maybe a decade or two. So in essence, the thinking is perhaps it's not here and it's not right now. But yet we can see the effects of what's happening to the world already. And those are warning signs. And rather than wait until it's too late and then try to do something about it, we need to start sitting up and saying, okay, the signs are there. It might not be here, it might not be now, but we have to start doing something right now. We need to get on this train, this bandwagon, and we need to start making our own efforts. And people, again, we come back to our situation. We say, okay, well, what can you do? I was reading up. There is actually an organization. Well, one of the things they say you can do is you can plant a tree. And they say for every human being, if we plant 6 trees a month per person, we offset our carbon footprint. Now, you might say, okay, well, I can only plant so many trees in my garden before it's full and there's nowhere else to go, given. But there is organizations such as one I found, it's Tree Nation, and that's tree-nation.com. And basically what they do is they plant trees on behalf of people. So you can go to their website and you can pay for a tree, which is €0.1 of a euro for one tree. And they'll plant a tree in land that they have acquired just for tree planting. So you can pay them and they plant the trees. Or otherwise you could just donate €5, I think it is, and that's enough to offset your carbon footprint for a month. So there are things that we can do, definitely. And I think we need to start being more proactive in terms of the education. I now see in our children's science syllabus, they've started including lessons on how bad certain things that we do are for the environment. So the pollution we're putting in, the creation of the plastic, the waste. So children are starting to learn about that, but I think we need to drive it even harder to get the message home. Because children can learn about it in their school books, in their syllabus, but if they don't see people actually practicing it, then they're not going to apply it themselves. So we as adults need to be the leaders from that perspective. And in countries where deforestation continues, I had a discussion with management from a organization called Plastic Bank about a year or two ago, where they talk about socially responsible purchases. So where people, when they go to the shop now, the supermarket, they start to look at the product and they say, okay, this product contains this, which is not good as regards the environment. Therefore, I'm not buying this. I'm going to buy a substitute. And we need to start looking like that, looking at products like that way. And the companies which don't want to come to the party and which continue with burning down the forests. And for example, here, I know the palm oil industry is one that takes a big knock from an environment perspective. So if those companies don't want to come to the party, then I personally believe we should start being more socially responsible and not buying the products until they change. We can vote with our purchases, we can vote with our dollars, and they will eventually feel the effects and they will start to change. So there's many different ways to drive it. We need to make whatever effort we can in whatever way we can.
I agree with you, Franz. Collective and concrete actions are needed for saving our environment. On to the next question. Shay is another important character. I would also say that she is the female protagonist of the novel. Am I right in assuming that, Franz?
Correct, yes.
Rian is Shay's mother, and when we enter into the opening chapters of the novel, Rian gets kidnapped. What I want to ask is, Rian and Shay seem to have a very close bond as mother and daughter. And the first person she worries after she gets kidnapped is Shay. Even though she says that her husband will be able to tackle the situation, she is first and foremost worried about Shay's mental condition and how she will overcome this traumatic situation. Family plays an important role in everyone's life. My question is, how does the concept of family play its role in the novel word realm, Franz?
Okay. I think from the perspective of Shay, it's very important to her. It's evident throughout the story of how much reliance she places on her relationship with her father, with her mother, how she trusts him implicitly in terms of everything that she's learned from life. And she longs to have a life and ultimately a relationship such as she sees her mother and father have. And in terms of the boyfriends that she has, she finds herself measuring her relationship against against that of her parents, because she holds him in such high esteem. So when her mother disappears, this is firstly a challenge, because her mother disappears without a trace. So there's no understanding as to where her mother's gone. And of course, she doesn't know that her mother has disappeared into this fantasy world. She's only thinking in the context of in the context of the real world. And then when she ends up in the fantasy world, and she then discovers this woman who she believes is her mother, whose values are totally the opposite of those that she always knew her mother to have, that leads her to question her own set of values and wonder, is she really a good person, when she starts to see that she's displaying behaviors similar to these of this woman who she now believes is her mother in the fantasy world. So it has a big impact for her in terms of the fact that she's taken her values from her parents, and she's tried to model her life as around that as far as possible. Plus, it's also it's a very big disappointment then when she realizes that the person she believes to be her mother is not actually the person she thought she was, which has a big impact. So I've tried to place quite a bit of emphasis on that in the story, and I think it does have quite an impact in terms of who she is, and how it affects her thinking in the story.
Can we say then that the story is about Shay's Shay recovering her true self through this ordeal, Shay, France?
You could say, because she feels that she betrays the person who has been her best friend since she's arrived there, which is Prince Fear. So through feeling that she needs to lie to him to protect her family, she actually does betray him. And then she has to regain his trust. So, she goes from this person who is honest and who has high values to a person who displays behavior which she doesn't like, and she recognizes that or believes that it's wrong. And then she has to move from that place to come back to who she really was, to ultimately get Prince Fear to trust her again, along with the people who support him.
Right, you are, France. And my next question is about Alguad. Am I pronouncing it right, France?
Alguad, yeah.
Alguad. He seems to be a fascinating character because he's neither a black character or a white character. He still stands right in the middle. Sometimes he's good to Rian, and other times he tortures people by maiming them. What I want to ask is, throughout the novel, he's always in search of a thing called great power. Not just power, he calls it great power. Why is he chasing after this great power, and what does he hope to gain by achieving this great power? France?
Okay. The great power is a jewel which is being formed. Legend has it that there were two people who were very powerful in terms of magic, who did battle against each other. And the power that they wielded was almost as powerful as the gods of the time. So in this battle, what they did is they actually infuriated the gods, who then froze them and made them a statue. And where they froze, their weapons were crossed. And every couple of 100 years, there is a drop that falls from where the weapons are crossed onto the ground. So it's kind of like the idea of a stalactite or a stalagmite in a cave forming, where the drop drops on the same spot when it falls, and it's gradually forming this jewel. And this jewel is now at the point where it is virtually completely formed, and the person who gets the jewel will be able to take the power of that jewel and wield it for their own purposes. So if this is a good person who has good intentions, they will be able to use it for good. If it's a person who has evil intentions, they will be able to use it for evil. And ultimately, Olgwad wants this power because the jewel is rumored, the power that it will have, it has the power to summon evil forces which have the power to potentially destroy the kingdom as they know it, or the world. And if he can, through the book, travel to another world, such as present time Earth, where Shay originates, then he could potentially destroy that world as well, or take it over and control it with evil. So he's after the power to basically be the ultimate ruler of everything. So that's why he's looking for this power. At times he does, when he first finds Ryan, because she looks exactly like Micah, he does consider that perhaps she would come with him on this journey, and he would be able to betray Micah, because in the back of his mind, he does believe that at some point Micah will betray him anyway. So that's why he's more sort of accommodating and friendly towards Ryan initially.
From what I read, particularly the interactions between Ryan and Algua, I found that Algua responds positively to Ryan's rebellion. Even though she refuses to give out the answers to Algua about this great power and the bookmarks and books, he still treats her, to some point, he treats her like a human being, even though he maims her in the middle of the story. And what I want to ask is, from the point of view of Algua, is he trying to become a godlike being, or someone who is on the path of destruction? France?
No, he's trying to become more, I wouldn't say he's on a path of destruction, no. Not personally, no. He would like to become a godlike being, but in an evil sense. And in that sense, he would be able to create a path of destruction, but not a destruction of himself, but that of whichever he applies the power to. So to worlds which he can destroy and rule with evil.
When you said that this great power is actually a jewel, I have the habit of reading Japanese comic books, and they are colloquially called manga. I came across this interesting manga called Inuyasha, where the main antagonist is after this jewel shard. So the jewel gets broken into many pieces, and it is up to the heroes to collect all these jewel shards and make the jewel whole again, so that when it becomes whole, they can wish for something good or something evil. Whoever gets hold of the entire jewel will decide the turn of events of the world. So when you were saying those things about the jewel, I was reminded of a Japanese manga. See, the collective unconscious is there in everybody else. Even though Jung stated it long ago, we are sitting here in the year 2021 talking about jewels, and we already have a story in Japan where a lady manga artist came up with a story. And I'm not saying that these two are very similar. I'm just saying that we are all human beings, and even though our skin color is different, our thoughts are mostly the same, particularly in our unconscious. Let us move on to the next question, Franz. Okay. When I was reading this novel, I was hooked into the concept of two worlds operating side by side. On one side, you had dungeons, horses, and sorcery, and on the other side, you had computers, cameras, and cars. Can you elaborate on the differences between these two worlds, Franz?
Okay. I think the real world with the cars and the cameras and the computers doesn't play such a big role in the context of the novel, but it is there as a base to draw on, and it needs to be there. But I think I know at one point I think it's Ryan mentions the camera to Olgwad, and he doesn't understand what a camera is. So I think it's a bit humorous, but it also lets the reader think about, what would they do if they found themselves in that situation. I mean, how could you explain what we take for granted in today's world if we had to be transported back in time to medieval times and try and deal without a smartphone, without computers, and try and explain to people what we have and how it works, I think it would be a real struggle for us per se. And I think one of the things that was on my mind first and foremost was if we had to go back to a time like that, what would the medical care be like? So in that time, sure, there is sorcery, and there are people that what would you call medicine men, but again, you wouldn't have the medical care that we're used to having today and that we take for granted so much. So I think from that perspective, really, they are worlds apart. And we do, as people who love fantasy, we do tend to romanticize the fantasy worlds. We do imagine, how fantastic they are and how great it would possibly be to experience that. But they are sort of those real elements which sort of bring us back to thinking how great it really would be to experience it. So yeah, and one of the taglines I used for the story in some of the places where I posted it is, if you could travel to the world in a book, would it be a dream come true, or would it be your worst nightmare? So I think that's something to think about. But there are pretty obviously big differences in terms of the different worlds. Yeah.
So the bulk of the story happens in the fantasy world, and we only get a glimpse of the world that is Earth, right, Franz?
Yes.
And is it all right in assuming that most of the fantasy setting is actually medieval, because all the writers, including yourself, Franz, always choose medieval setting like kingdoms, castles, and dungeons and so on? Is there any particular affinity for writers to go after the medieval age?
I think, I don't know why, for some reason, it seems that
must be the romantic in you, I think.
Maybe. Indeed, but I think a lot of fantasy writers do go that route. But again, there are fantasy novels which don't go that way. So there is one Neil Gaiman novel that I've read, which was more about, it wasn't set in medieval times, but it was set perhaps, if I remember correctly, in the 1800s in London. So it wasn't quite medieval, but it was sort of neither modern either. And that was very different. And then they talk about magical realism. So I did write a short story as well, which is set in the modern day, where involving wishes and bubbles. So again, I think it varies from story to story, but I think for what we mostly grow up on is fantasy stories set in medieval times.
Sure, Franz. And are we going to see a continuation of Shay's story, or is this novel, Word Realm, a standalone novel, Franz?
Karthik, I haven't actually, I haven't started writing a second book or even a third book. I do, however, have some ideas in my mind.
So you do have plans to continue the story then?
I do have ideas to continue it. So I do think at some point I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write sort of more. I'm going to add to the story, write another book, possibly another two, make it a trilogy. Yeah.
So you're planning it as a trilogy, and you're going to finish the story in the third book, right, Franz?
If it goes to the third book, that's where it'll finish, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we are looking forward to the second and the third book. Okay. And the next question is about Ryan's kidnapping. The opening chapters of the novel is about her journey into the fantasy world, and she meets up with Algoth and she gets kidnapped by him. What I want to ask is, she gets confined in a dungeon and goes through so much of troubles. And this tone that you are trying to set up in the opening chapters, what was your intention in setting up this kind of tone as soon as the readers start reading your book, Franz?
Well, this is this was sort of really where I saw the story starting. It was sort of the event which would impact the family. So from this, Ryan was traveling to the fantasy world on a daily basis because of her illness, to go to the Rainbow Lake for healing, and then she just vanished. She didn't come back. So her husband, Shay's father, he knew or had a suspicion what happened when she didn't come back, and he then started searching for her. On the other side of that, he didn't feel that he could tell their daughter Shay what had happened, so he concealed that from her because he felt responsible, for one. It was him that had introduced Ryan to the world, where she'd been captured or something had happened to her. And he didn't know how he would be able to explain that. And he didn't know what Shay's reaction would be, whether she would forgive him. So he concealed it from her, and that had the impact of also distancing him from her. But it was sort of the event which had that impact on the whole family, and sort of drove into the rest of the story from there.
As you said, Franz, Andy is actually the creator of this fantasy world, and he conceals this entire fantasy world from her daughter. Did he decide this on his own, or was this something that both parents decided not to reveal it to her, Franz?
Well, they both decided not to reveal it to her. Because Ryan was obviously traveling to and from the world, so she knew, she was well aware after the first time she'd been introduced to it. But they never told her about it. No, I think, and part of that was because Ryan was ill, and she didn't tell Andy about it. First of all, he discovered it later, which is why he then created the lake in the story and then took her through to the lake. And for them to have told Shay about this world, they didn't know sort of what effect it might have. Plus, they also had the concern that they might have to tell Shay about her mother's illness, which they didn't really want to do, because her mother tried to keep it from both Shay and her father, her husband.
Yes, Franz. And my next question is, after all, about Andy. He is credited as the creator of the fantasy world that we see in Word Realm. When we are introduced to him, he is being pursued by someone whom we do not know. I like to read these lines. I quote, "Andy cursed the Black Knight, cursed his pursuer, the snow, the cold, the wind, and this whole damned world he had created." I unquote. My question to you is, he actually calls the world he had created the whole damned world. This question has two parts. First is, what was the motivation behind Andy creating a world such as this? And the second part of the question is, does he regret creating a fantasy world, Franz?
Okay. He created the world because he's an author. He's a fantasy author. He's a famous fantasy author. So writing fantasy, that's what he does. What we find at one point in the story is that he was given the opportunity to bring this world that he created to life when somebody gave him bookmarks which he could use to enter the world which he created. So when that initially started, he thought it was great. It was really something amazing that he could enter this world that he created and experience it for himself. Then he took that a step further when he discovered that his wife was ill and dying, and he wanted to try and heal her. So he took it a step further, and he tried to do that good for her. So that was still okay. But then when it came to, firstly, Ryan disappearing and him being unable to find her, and then in his search for her, when he ended up being pursued by someone who actually didn't seem to care if they killed him, at that point, with his frustrations were becoming clear. He hadn't been able to find Ryan. He was being pursued by somebody. In the story, we also understand that he was questioned by the police. There was a lot of bad press that went with his wife's disappearance. So when it all starts to come together for him, he begins to think that this is actually all a lot more trouble than what he saw, a lot more trouble than it's worth. So something that he might have enjoyed in the beginning has actually become, in a manner of speaking, perhaps his worst nightmare.
So when he started creating this world, it was like a dream for him, but ended up becoming his own nightmare. You talked about this in the same lines a few questions ago, right? Talking about it can either be a dream or a nightmare, right, Franz?
Correct.
So that theme plays into the plot line, right, Franz?
Yes.
Okay. Did he invent this world by accident, or was it done consciously, Franz?
It was done consciously. As he, I think writers tend to, or some writers, they tend to base characters on real people. So hence the reason why, for example, Micah looks exactly like Ryan in the story. So he had the idea of Ryan Micah looking like Ryan in the story, which is why she ended up like that. So it was created consciously, at least part of it, while the rest of it would have been purely from his imagination.
When you were talking about Ryan and Micah's similar appearance, it seemed as though even though they are similar in terms of physical appearance, they are polar opposites when it comes to their attitude towards life, and as well as their their psychological profile. So is Andy not able to control how they behave in the fantasy world? Or can he only create the outward appearance then, Franz?
No, he can control how they behave in the story as well. So I mean, he had written Micah's appearance, and he had written her personality. I mean, that was all him. He did that consciously.
So the Micah's personality is Andy's doing then.
Yes.
That is really fascinating thing to know. So he controls the events of the book, which in turn affects him and his family.
Indeed.
Ironic indeed. My next question is, this is the one question that we ask every writer that comes to our show, and that is, what made you want to become a writer in the first place?
Okay. I can remember since when I first started to read, I must have been about 6 years old. And something that sticks with me, I mean, once I learned to read, I just loved reading. And there was one story, it was in a school book. I must have been in grade standard 1, I think. And they used to give us these books to read. And I remember there was one story, it was also like a little fantasy story, and there was a dragon in it somewhere. But just through reading stories, I loved stories. And I just loved books, and I would just literally just read and read just anything and everything I could get my hands on. And I got to the point where I enjoyed stories so much, I thought, but I have some stories myself I'd like to write and to tell. And I started writing. My first stories were handwritten in a notebook. I used to illustrate them myself as well. I remember it was the adventures of a car and a talk to other cars. I don't have those notebooks anymore, but from that point on, it always stayed with me. It never went away. It was there through school. I didn't do that much writing in school. And after school, I went into a corporate career, but it was always there. It never, ever went away. And then when I finally left the corporate world, I said, okay, now it's time to start writing. So it's been there all through my life. Then I think just the fact that I loved reading and enjoyed other people's stories is just something where I thought, well, I can make my own stories. And there are stories in my mind that I want to tell people. So that's it. Yeah.
France, avid readers always progress towards becoming writers, and what you said told me right now seems to follow the same line of thought. Uh, you read a lot, and then you started channeling your thoughts into writing. Can we say that readers who read a lot of novels, a lot of stories, come to a certain point where they cannot, their thirst for good stories are not satisfied by the novels they read, and that's why they think about writing their own stories, France?
I think most likely, yes. I think there's always a story that they think, well, why hasn't this story been told? Or I want to tell that story, and then they'll write it. They will.
I can tell a better story than that person. Something like that, right, France?
Yeah, I think more and more, I think I see myself becoming not adversely critical, but of other books. I think, okay, as I read them, I'm sort of looking at them critically, thinking, what about this? What about that? And I think that's what every writer does, and potentially every reader who reads a lot of books. Yeah.
Yeah, with time and experience, you start to notice things in the story that you wouldn't have noticed years before as a reader, and you would think along the lines of, I could have written a better story, I could have written a better characters, and something like that. That's why I asked you that. It has nothing to do with arrogance. It simply goes with the thought of readers becoming equipped as storytellers, I guess. My next question to you is, if there is one word in the English language which you would call as your favorite, what would it be, France?
I
know there are many words in the English language, and I'm constricting that to just one word. Maybe you can choose to say one or two words.
There are so many words.
Maybe top three then?
The one that comes to mind is serendipity. Which is the chance occurrence of events in a beneficial way. I remember the first time I saw that word, there's a movie with the same title, and I watched the movie, and I think it's actually a romance movie, but it had a unique storyline. But I think that word is just one of those words that stands out to me. It's just very unique, and what it says is just so. There's just so many things it can say in terms of life events and life experiences that can happen. But I must say, when I saw the question, I actually went and looked up unique words, and that's the one that's always stuck with me. And amazingly enough, it came up in my search. But there was a couple of others that came up, which are also unique and special as well. So I couldn't say I have one favorite word. No.
Why we ask this question is because as writers, they tend to use the same word again and again, and they consciously decide not to use a particular word because they're so they're so favorable towards that word. That's why I ask you this question. Is there any word that you keep avoiding in your novels because you use them repeatedly, France?
I wouldn't say any more. I think this is. I try now.
It can be a word which comes quite often when you write when you start your writing process. It can be like that as well.
Yeah, there's a few of those, and I think it just comes with the writing process to focus on getting rid of them, as you say. So, a couple. Finally, then, those kind of words. I try to look at making sure that I don't have them, or I have as little as possible in my writing. Definitely, finally, I see it come up again, and then. And I think in terms of good writing, you try to remove words like those and just tighten up the sentences on the whole. So.
Good to know, France. The next question is about Shay. We are introduced to this character who is actually the protagonist of the story. We are introduced to her during the 10th chapter of the novel. And during this time, she has two important problems in her life. And one of them would be her writing struggles, and the other one would be her unfulfilling love life. Her writing struggles, they are directly they are directed towards her father, because her father is an accomplished writer, and she seems to struggle in her writing, all because of her father's writing eclipsing her writing. And on the other hand, you have her unfulfilling love life that also is directly connected to her parents and their treasured love for each other. What I want to ask you is, both her problems, writing struggles as well as unfulfilling love life, have roots to her parents. Do you psychoanalyze your characters when writing them, Franz?
I wouldn't really say so, no. I think in the future, going forwards with the planning process, I think there has to be some psychoanalysis as to why the characters are the way they are and the way that you or the writer presents them that way. But in the instance of Shay, no, it just sort of happened. And I know, basically, as I mentioned, that was sort of something I went through when I started writing, was to think, well, do I really think I can write something which will be good, which will be excellent, as good as, other famous authors? And I asked myself, I struggled with that. So that's sort of how that ended up in the story. So I wouldn't really say it was necessarily psychoanalyzing. And then the other one was just in terms of the boyfriend at the time that she broke up with. Again, she holds her parents' relationship in a very, for her, they set the bar very high. So she's always sort of measuring what she has and who she is with against that standard. And if it doesn't measure up to that, then she's thinking, well, maybe this isn't sort of the person I should be with, which isn't necessarily the way to assess the relationships that she has. But no, I wouldn't say that I psychoanalyzed it. No, it just happened that's how I put it in the story.
I asked you this question because I came across words such as trigger and subconscious during my read through of the novel. So I thought I could ask you this question. And the next question, I think my questions are over. The next part of the interview is me asking you to give us a reading session. And we ask this to our authors because it is always fascinating to hear the story written by the author, heard through the author's voice. So I invite you to give us a reading session of Word Realm, Franz.
Okay. Okay, so I'll start reading, and I'll just carry on. You can stop me when the time is up, or
sure, we can do that, Franz.
Okay. Okay, so the part that I'm reading comes from, I think it's about chapter 29, where they have actually just fled after the murder of Fia's father. Okay, Josh nodded his understanding. Shay could see the apprehension on his features despite the flickering shadows the torch cast. Shay hoped that their pursuers would pass without noticing the narrow opening, or, if they noticed it, they would ignore it. She took small comfort that they could defend the entrance to the chamber easily. It would be just the two of them with a torch against an army of soldiers who would keep coming one by one without stopping until they were exhausted. Shay could not understand the logic to this chamber and began to search for a way out. They were underground and effectively trapped if the enemy decided to enter the narrow passage. Then she saw it. In the opposite corner from the sconce where the lit torch was placed, there was a hole in the wall. It appeared to be about 2 bricks in height. Shay stepped closer to it and investigated further. There was indeed a hole in the wall. She looked around it and realized that the bricks were simply laid on top of one another without being cemented in place. The wall would simply collapse with a few blows. She quickly reached up to take down a brick, and then Josh spoke in his normal voice, not bothering to whisper. "Don't, Shay." Shay stopped and turned to face Josh. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "This is our escape." "No, it's mine," Josh said, stepping closer and speaking normally. "Give me the bookmark and the book, Shay. It's over." Shay wanted to back away, but realized she was up against the wall. She rested one hand on the top brick she had been about to take down. "Why, Josh?" Shay was incredulous. "Why would you betray me?" Josh laughed bitterly as he drew a knife from his scabbard inside his shirt. "Why wouldn't I betray you, Shay? You betrayed our love. You left me, and within 2 days, I find you in the arms of someone else. And how is fear going to help you now? Shay held her ground. Be reasonable, Josh. I was honest with you. I ended it, us, before I met fear, and there is truly nothing between him and me. Besides, you saw his reaction when he saw me in my father's chambers. Do you think that is the reaction of a man who has feelings for me? Josh replied, so you say. From what I have seen, I think you are a liar. It's been 2 days, Shay. 2 days, and you're in someone else's arms. I came here to save you. I believed that you would feel differently once I saved you. I damn near gave up my life for you, and for what? So your mother could pin her murder on me? She has done the same to me, Josh. We're in this together. Are we? Really? How is that? You long to return to fear. And what about me? I know. What about me? I have made an arrangement for myself in the sick, twisted little world your father created. Now give me the book, Shay. Give me the book and I might let you live. Josh stepped forward, holding the knife menacingly. I can't do that, Josh. I'm working out for the best of all of us. Do you not see that? I have lost my father. I've lost my mother. I want out of here just as much as you. Oh, but I have an out. I have arranged an out with Olgwad Shay. He too is a traitor and a fool, but he serves my interest right now. When the time comes, I will end his life and do the rest of you a favor. There is, of course, a price, though, and that is the book. Josh reached out his hand to Shay. Shay was astounded. You made a deal with Olgwad? What is the deal, Josh? How could you betray me? Josh laughed again, a hollow laugh. I betrayed you? You really are something. You are no better than your mother. What is the deal, Josh? Shay had no weapon but the brick she held onto. She knew it was heavy and would be difficult to swing at Josh. She would need both hands, and her movement would alert Josh immediately what she was trying to do. If he came much closer, she would have no advantage, for he would be upon her in an instant. She had no doubt that Josh intended to kill her. It doesn't matter, Shay. Just give me the book. You knew about this place all along, didn't you? This is your place. You knew about this passage. Olgwad told you, didn't he? I wondered how you were so good to spot the opening to this chamber so easily. I'm guessing you even planned for us to end up here right now. Now you start to understand, Shay, and you will also understand there is no way out, at least not your way. You can get out with me or be your mother's prisoner if you don't die first. Damn you, Josh. Josh stopped for a moment. What the hell? You are so naive, Shay. I'm glad that you ended what we had. In these circumstances, I see just how naive you really are, and I don't think I would want to be with someone as naive as you. This world is for survivors. You feel so educated only because you plotted with Olgwad and he let you in on his plan. He did not need to fool me in. By the time I finished the book, I knew it all already. You see, you had the book, and you never even bothered to read it. It was all in there. Well, almost. I read the book for Olgwad, which is why he agreed a pact with me. They can't read the book, Shay. They don't know what it says. That serves my interest very well. You see, there's great value in offering advice, which proves to be valuable, especially when it helps defeat the enemy or avoid the enemy. Olgwad was only too happy to have me as a partner with what I gave him. And for how long do you think it would last? He betrayed Micah. Because she was going to betray him, and he knew it, Josh responded. Don't you get it? You and I hold the key. We aren't in the book. We can change what has been written. We are free from it. We are as gods, Shay. Gods. Do you know how that feels? We might be as gods, Josh, but gods will still do the right thing. What happens when the book runs out, Josh? When the book runs out, so does your value. And neither you nor I will have any more influence. We need to end this now, Josh. If the book ends with this world at war, where will it end? Too many people have died already. Listen to yourself, Shay. These aren't people. They are characters in a book. Your father's book. They are toys for us to manipulate as we see fit. No, Josh. I can't explain how this world is alive, but it is. You forget they killed my father. They are as real as you and me. Why else are we here right now? Shay studied Josh, trying to find something which she could use as an advantage. His eyes were cold and menacing. She saw in him something she had never seen before. It was the animal that fed on revenge. Josh felt so wronged and betrayed that his desire for revenge was now controlling his every move. The kindness she had seen in Josh that had attracted her to him in the first place was gone now. There was no part of the Josh she remembered. He was someone entirely different, angry, vengeful, hateful. She wondered briefly if this place made everyone mad. Was it that they were not supposed to cross into the world of fiction? Her mother had turned and become evil, and now Josh. Shay knew in that moment if she handed over the book, she would not leave the chamber. In that instant, she heaved the brick on which her hand rested. It scraped from its place in the wall, and Shay released it almost as soon as she felt it start to drag her arm down. Josh, saw Shay's posture change, and he knew she was working to free a brick in the wall. He lunged forward to cover the last distance between himself and Shay. His hand, which held the knife, was extended. The brick tumbled through the air and landed on Josh's outstretched arm, deflecting his aim from Shay. At the same time, Shay spun around and pushed Josh with all her might into the wall. Her push, combined with his momentum, sent him crashing into the wall. He fell through the opening created by the bricks, which tumbled over, grunting as he landed on the uneven surface. He struggled to find his feet on the clutter of bricks around him, which gave Shay time to pick up another brick to launch at Josh. As she bent over, she saw the knife that Josh had held, and she picked it up with her other hand. But Josh had found his footing and jumped at Shay. Shay dropped the brick she held and brought her other hand up with a knife defensively. Josh cried out, and they both went down on the floor of the chamber. Shay felt her grip on the knife wrench free, and she assumed that Josh had taken it from her. She rolled away as quickly as she could, fearing an attack from him. Then she stood and turned to face Josh. Josh kneeled. He clutched at the knife that protruded from his chest. Shay stood frozen in horror and watched him as he tried to speak. "No!" Shay cried. She rushed over to Josh and caught him as he collapsed. She cradled his head in her lap. Blood poured from the wound in his chest. His eyes were open. He was still alive. He looked at Shay without saying a word. Shay could see the anger, hatred, and vengeance from a moment ago were gone now, and the old Josh was back. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she watched the life flow from Josh. "I'm sorry, Josh. Forgive me. I never meant to kill you. I never meant to hurt you. Don't die. Please don't die." Josh looked at Shay silently and then coughed. His voice was so soft, Shay had to strain to hear. "Not about war. Osum is distraction. They want Ishlo, Demalane's power. Time's almost up." "What about Demalane? What power?" Josh did not answer. "Olgwad, Micah, no."
Time is almost up here as well, friends.
Okay. So leave it at that.
Thank you for the wonderful reading session. We are right in the middle of action, I think, in the novel, and we are sorry to say that we have to stop the author from reading his work right now. I hope our audience had a wonderful time listening to Franz read from Word Realm. Word Realm is a young adult fantasy novel, and it is available in retail stores as well as online stores. The links will be in the description box below. Franz, we had a great time conducting this interview with you. Before you leave, we have questions from our YouTube audience. Is it all right if you take some of them and try your best answering them, Franz?
Yes, by all means.
Thank you. Then on to the interaction with our YouTube audience. The first question comes from Anusha Hegde, and her question is, Anusha Hegde just said good evening, and I thought it was a question. The actual question comes from Tike, and he asks, will you prefer your novel to be adapted into a movie?
I think every author would like that. I think so. If it could happen, if it does happen, that would be great. Yes.
And if your novels, one of your novels can be adapted into a movie, which do you think has the markings of a Hollywood blockbuster, Franz?
Oh,
we can all dream, right, Franz?
Indeed, we can all dream. So I think if I have to look at the books I've written, I would say at this point, I think unless I write the other stories for Word Realm, I think then that would be more suited to become a Hollywood blockbuster, hopefully. Otherwise, at this point, there's another novel which I've written, which is called Viva la Vida. It was inspired by the Coldplay song of the same name. So that one is sort of in the setting of Pompeii and Vesuvius. And I think at this point, if somebody had to come and say to me, okay, which one would be a movie, I would be inclined to say that one at this point. But obviously, if Word Realm, like I said, if I write the second and the third book, then I think as a whole, potentially that would be better.
After the success of Game of Thrones, I think more people are looking into adapting fantasy novels with the medieval setting. And think you're good to go in that front, France. Here's to hoping for some good news.
Yes, absolutely.
The next question comes from Shankar, and he asks, every writer has a ritual. What is your writing routine?
My writing routine, I just basically try to write every day. So I at least try to sit down and write, if I can, 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. And like I said before, I don't bother editing anymore. I just write because I know I'm going to come back to editing at a later stage. At this point, if I can write 2,000 or 3,000 words a day, it's great. And I think every writer has to just try and do that. That's the most important habit to have.
So your writing habit is the one thing that keeps you going as a writer. What I
Absolutely.
want to ask is, do you have any interesting quirks or habits that you follow when you write?
Not so much. I think always try to have a cup of coffee at hand, close at hand. And that's it. I think I don't really have any quirks as such. If I need something, then obviously I just go. If I need to, if I'm not sure of something, or I need to try and get some idea, then I might go and search for something relevant on the internet. But always come back to the writing until it's finished. And try to take regular breaks as well, because the one thing as a writer, I think, is we tend to sit too much. So it's not exactly the most healthy thing to do. So try to stay active and try and at least walk for 30 minutes a day. Yeah.
Writers are good observers. They observe the life and the characters that occupy them. And you may also be doing that, but you're subconsciously not aware of the fact that you're doing that. Because if you don't observe life, you cannot take characters from real life and take them into your novels. My next question to you is, this question comes from Prachi Gosal, and this person asks, what is the ideal relationship that a writer should have with his agent? How much should we take their advice while writing? This seems more towards the business side of writing than actual writing itself.
Yeah. Well, I think the relationship with the agent should be very open. I don't think a writer should necessarily feel that the agent is their boss. Although potentially the agent, I wouldn't like to use the word gateway, but the agent is there to get them a publisher or get them published. So they need to respect that. I think that if the agent has advice to give, they should be willing to listen, or the writer should be willing to listen. But it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to accept everything that the agent says. I do believe they should feel free to be able to, push back if it's something they don't agree with. They should feel free to express their own opinion and not just accept everything that the agent says as gospel. A writer writes the book, and how they write it, only they know how and why. So if they feel that it's really important to the story and the agent thinks it needs to be changed, I think they need to voice that, to explain as to why they might not like to change it and why they wrote it that way the first time. But I think on the whole, it's really a two-way street. I think it should be more, you should view an agent more as a friend to a degree. But there is, of course, always the business line that goes along with it. So
having an honest and open relationship with your agent is the way to go then, Franz.
Yes.
Thank you, Franz, for that wonderful detail. That's all from the YouTube audience. We had a great time, as well as our YouTube audience, listening to you and also hearing about the interesting tidbits about the story in Word Realm. Before you go, you can say your goodbye to the audience. And before you say goodbye, I want to personally invite you to come to the show on the day you publish the second novel in the planned trilogy, France.
Okay.
So we can talk about
Thank you.
the second novel in the book.
Yes. Okay. Most definitely.
Yeah.
That'll be an honor.
Yeah. The stage is
So-
yours, France. You can talk to the audience now.
Okay. So I'd like to say thank you very much to Karthik and the team at Litrial. Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a real honor to be here. And I'm honored to have everybody who has listened to the show, who has listened to me, and listened to the answers that I've given and the things that I've said. I hope you've been able to take away value from that. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And I'm really honored that you have taken the time to listen to me as an author. And please, if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email address is fkeyser, KEYSER1 @gmail.com. So feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to respond and answer your questions or give you whatever advice I can. But thank you again. I'm most grateful for being here, for being on the show, and to Karthik and the team for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, France. See you on another episode of the Writer's Preview, France.
Yes, I look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye, France.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
That was Franz Kaiser talking about his latest book, Word Realm. Word Realm is a young adult fantasy novel, and it is already out in stores now. The links are in the description box below. Before we end the show, I always talk about an interesting quotation from literature. Today's quotation comes from J.K. Rowling herself, and this quotation is taken from the third book in the series, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The setting is this: Dumbledore stands in front of an audience of school children in Hogwarts, and he talks about dark times. Here we go. I quote, "Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light." I unquote. I wanted to talk about this quotation because we are in the middle of a pandemic. So these are dark times indeed. We are getting vaccinated and we are getting cured, and we are going towards the path that shows us light. The underlying message of this quotation is always have hope. Without hope, we cannot survive and thrive. This is Karthik saying goodbye. See you on the next episode of The Writer's Preview.